So I don't need to tell you, we live together in a time of 24/7 media. We're constantly bombarded with information and opinions coming at us from every angle and coming at us so fast, we often don't give ourselves much time to stop and process and frankly just think. Boyd Matheson is the host of Inside Sources on KSL News Radio. He believes the world needs more great thinkers, and it's great to see you. We'll see how many times we say great in the course of this conversation. Listen, I joke with my friends all of the time. Don't say anything interesting, innovative, creative, or profound, or else I will invite you to say it on television. In this sense, you said it over the airwaves. In fact, you say it all the time. I've observed as a listener and a fan of your show that one of your greatest, highest compliments is to tell someone they are a great thinker.
Yeah. And we need more of it because we do it just as you described it. We are in such a rapid fire world that often we don't really slow down enough to actually think and even think about thinking, which is a whole nother level where you have to just go beyond headlines. You have to go beyond what somebody's shouting at you through the radio or on your TV or in your social media scroll, and just learn to just step back a little bit and think about what you think, why you think that way, and then more importantly, think about why others might think differently.
So define it a little further for us, Boyd, if you could, because you invite these very profound, eloquent, guests to come on your show and talk over the headlines and the politics of the day. What about them, or what about someone invites you to say, you're a great thinker? Is it like next level thinking? Is it like a kind of a spiral revolution they've had around an idea? Yeah,
it's interesting that they've really taken the time to dig into something in a different way, to look at it through a different lens. So they're not just regurgitating talking points. Yeah. I always say it's easy to give a speech. It's hard to say something that matters. and these great thinkers say something that matters because they've allowed themselves to challenge their own assumptions. It's not about being philosophical. This is not ivory tower kind of thinking.
Deep.
No, actually, some of the greatest thinkers I know, high school education, love to read, and reading's a big component to it because reading takes you to different places and spaces in your brain and in your heart that cause you to think very different. So a lot of it is being very intentional about your thinking.
As you talk about reading, I think it also helps us familiarize ourselves with different voices.
Yeah.
And that's interesting too, right? Someone who can pull in a different perspective into their own thoughts and opinions.
Yeah, and I love people who surprise me. On my show, I have everything from a socialist, to a conservative Republican and everything in between. And I just love that because it thinks, oh, wow, I'd never thought of it that way before.
Yeah, often a compliment we give here, and I'm sure you'll echo the sentiment, is it's never been said that way before. Yeah. Sometimes it's just a different way of looking at it or saying it, right?
Yep.
Well, teach us, help us become great thinkers, because I know you are one of these as well. You say we can sit, we can stay, marinate with problems a little bit longer.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is Albert Einstein. He said he always said that he wasn't smarter than anyone else. He was just willing to stay with the question a little bit longer. And so often in our social media scroll, we just kind of scroll. And so we look at headlines, and so we're not really getting deep information. And so you have to cause yourself to just pull back just a little bit, slow down, and say, okay, I'm going to stay with this conversation and make it a conversation. So even if you're reading something on your social media, have a conversation with the author.
Yes.
And have that in your head and play through it and say, oh, that's interesting. I wonder where that came from. And start asking those kind of questions in a very conversational manner and just stay with it. I always say go upstream and go across a little bit as you read something. So if you read something, it's like, I'm not sure about that. So kind of go up a little bit. What's the research behind it? What are the organizations that are saying it? Go across. What are other people saying about this? And so even kind of that vertical and horizontal, staying with the question longer can really transform your thinking.
We live in such a knee-jerk society, and a few months back I remember a public figure said something that ruffled some feathers, and I was quite disappointed at how quickly people felt the need to respond about it on social media without even giving it more than 1, 2, 3
nanosecond.
Hours thought. Like the sitting with it, there is value in that, there is strength in that, there's wisdom in that.
Yeah, one of the greatest challenges I think we have in our society is instant certainty. That instantly you read that headline, it's like, oh my goodness, I knew it. And so we're making judgments, we're moving through that rather than stepping back and letting that marinate a little bit. Look a little deeper, look beyond the obvious.
You believe there's power in writing out your thoughts to help deepen those thought lines.
Yeah. Unless you write it out, you really don't know what you think.
That's bold. I like that. That's bold. Yeah.
Yeah. Francis Bacon said that reading makes you full, collaboration makes you ready, but writing makes you exact. And so often we have things just kind of rattling around in our heads or in our hearts. But if you really want to know what you think, what you believe, even what you feel, write it down. And I'm old school. I think you should write it with a pen. I think you should get a blank piece of paper because it's different than texting, different than typing. Those are all different components of your brain.
Right.
Even when I'm going to do something on radio, even though I'm just going to kind of riff on it, if I really want to know what I think about the issue, I write it out first, handwritten with a pen, and it really causes you to, again, get exact in terms of what is it that I'm thinking, why am I, because then you read some of those sentences like, well, I don't believe that.
Right,
or wow, that's wrong. Yeah. You know, or man, there's a hole in that argument right there. Or man, that is something I'm passionate about. So those are really important parts of it.
You and I share that sentiment. I spoke in my church on Easter Sunday, and my husband leaned forward right before, I stood up. He's like, "Are those your notes?" It was like chicken scratch, right? He's like, "We have a computer.
That's the best.
We have a laptop." But for me, that's so helpful and mindful to put pen to paper, as you described.
It's one of the things we're really missing out in society, especially our young people.
Yes, you believe we're also missing curiosity, and that's a huge component to good thinking.
Yeah, I think one of the great threats to a relationship, to a community, to a country is that lack of curiosity. Because if I can't even pull back enough to say, I wonder why Brooke thinks that way, or I wonder why so-and-so believes that. I actually had an experience, two politicians, opposite ends of the spectrum. One believed that federal government was the answer to everything. The other believed small local government was the answer to everything. And so they kind of went like this, but then they asked each other, they got curious, why do you think that way? And it was interesting, the person who thought big government was important had grown up in Alabama where the local government was very corrupt. And it was the federal government that came in and saved him. The other had parents who grew up in a country where the national government was corrupt and prevented them from starting their own business, pursuing their own dreams. And when they both started to understand, oh, that's why he thinks that way. Oh, that's why she comes from that point of view. Everything changes. So that curiosity is so important. And I actually think from a relationship standpoint, think about it. If you've lost curiosity in your spouse, in your significant other, in your loved ones, in your children, that's a big challenge. So stay curious and let them surprise you. I know we all have that neighbor and we know how they're going to react. And so sometimes we get preemptively offended with people.
We're certain.
Or we block it because we are certain.
Yeah.
Let them surprise you. And they will surprise you.
I like that. 30 seconds, you want us to avoid fragmented thinking. Yeah,
again, so much information coming in so fast that often we just keep processing. And you just have to learn to just pull back and just be still for a minute. Let things settle. And sometimes that requires you to put your phone away, turn the computer off. I do that for segments of my day where it's like, I don't care what's going on. I'm just going to think for a few minutes. And so I'm going to turn things off. I'm not responding to email or text or anything else. Got to get rid of the fragmentation.
I actually find that, I haven't thought of it as you described it, I'm glad you put words to it, but I find that helpful as a news consumer, like wanting to be an informed person when big things are happening like Ukraine, to take in little bites is exhausting. But if you give it a break and then come into it, I feel like the information's more substantial and the thought line is more generous too.
Definitely. Because again, we can just be consumed. And so it just keeps coming at you and then you never really know exactly what you think or why you think that way. And so that's a big piece of the puzzle. All
right, if you want more insight into great thinking, hear from great thinkers and learn from this great thinker, you can listen to Boyd on KSL News Radio. Inside Sources airs
1 to 3.
1 to 3 on KSL News Radio. Thanks so much, Boyd. We appreciate you. You can find him on Instagram too.